Hello, everyone. Today I'm with Michael Vannoy Adams. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you, John. Pleasure.
Michael, today we're talking about Eros and maybe a little bit about Freud and Jung and others, Hillman. But I was reading this morning, it said, I thought, sometimes this happens to me before I do a podcast. I think, oh, how did I actually get involved in this? How did that happen? Because I read Carl Jung and he said, I falter before the task of finding the language that might adequately express the incalculable paradoxes of love. So that's the first thing. It's a very big topic, it seems, Eros. And I would just like to say, as I was saying to you just before, because you seem to have become like the resident analyst here on Jung and the World podcast, that I can relate very strongly to the mysterious force of Eros. I mean, I had one experience taking LSD, and for me, the foundation of that experience was perhaps the love in the cosmos, the mysterious force, but the mysterious creative force of the love in the cosmos. And I think it stayed with me forever. And that's kind of like a agape experience, or that I had or whatever. But then if I contrast it to Logos, and this is maybe something we can get into in our travels, if we can. Sometimes when I think about Logos, I think about the word handed down from Mount Sinai, the word, the 10 Commandments, the kind of the word of God, and I see Logos in a slightly negative sense. So maybe you could take that up.
Well, you've got 10 commandments.
Yeah.
And 2 of those seem to have to do with what you could call Eros. Thou shalt not commit adultery, and you're not supposed to covet your neighbor's wife. I don't know about your neighbor's husband, but you're not supposed to covet your neighbor's wife.
Right.
So 2 out of 10 seem to have something to do with love, sex, Eros, whatever you want to. All of those words, as you say, Marie von Franz, Jung, and other people say Eros is indefinable. You just can't you can't sum it up with any kind of satisfaction. All of the archetypes, to be an archetype, it has to be something big and powerful, and in the old world they would have said daimonic. So you get in Plato or in Socrates, you get Diotima saying that Eros is a mighty daimon or demon, and it's one of the archetypes. I mean, it really does nothing like love, sex, Eros, the erotic. Nothing seems to torture people any more than that does. It's one of the big ones. I mean, if you were to ask about complexes, somebody was talking to me today about that, and I said, what's there was a dream or there was some kind of thing about one of the complexes, and I said, well, and so the person said sex when I said something about the biggest complex, and of course, Freud has got us accustomed to thinking along those lines, that sex would be number 1 if you were to list the complexes or the archetypes. It was if you're going to be kind of monotheistic, in Freud's tradition, this is what Jung is talking about in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, when he says that it dawned on him that for Freud, sex or Eros was a deus absconditus, or a hidden or absconding God. It was something that Freud was not aware of, that he worshipped. There's no God more powerful than one that you don't know you're in the grip of. It's like he said that Yahweh is the God that Freud rejected when he declared himself an atheist, and he thought he was done with religion. He says in his book on religion, he says that education and reason, those two things, and their reason is one of the translations of logos again, but through education and reason, sooner or later you're bound to stop worshiping God. You will not be going to church or synagogue or any kind of place like that anymore. But Jung is saying, well, guess what? It sneaked up on him, and sex or Eros became his monotheistic God. So if you're James Hillman talking about psychology monotheistic or polytheistic, Freud is certainly somebody who continues in a kind of monotheistic or monoarchetypal. Jung said Freud
It was
discovered.
kind of his obsession. That's what we're saying in street
Well,
language.
it's his possession. It's his demon possession. That daimon or demon or spirit or divinity got him and had him for the rest of his life. Now, some other one, money is another big one, or God is a big one. There are lots of other archetypes that have incredible power over people, but sex is certainly one of the. And in the 20th century, there's a good argument to be made that it was the dominant archetype of the century.
And we've got to always say maybe that in the Victorian era, with the corsets and the strange dichotomy between official life and the underbelly, you know, that it was a time of great repression in many ways, wasn't it? I mean, he was talking to the spirit of his times, could we say?
Well, one of the ways that you might try to free yourself from a demon is to repress the demon. I mean, you could try to exorcise it, I suppose, but another way is to put it down and keep it down and keep it away from your consciousness. And one of Freud's great contributions is that he demonstrates that repression doesn't work. And so he sort of discovered willy-nilly that you can't repress the archetypes. The archetypes are bigger and stronger than we are. They will have their way with us in some regard. Morality and these kinds of things, it's some kind of funny effort on our part to imagine that we could actually control these larger than life and bigger than us forces. Sex proves us every day, or Eros proves every day, that it's a very slippery thing, and that people are always running afoul of it. They're losing control. They lose self-control. They do things, and then a minute later they say, "What happened? What came over me?" Or "What got into me? Why did I say that? Why did I do that?" There's some kind of energy there that is attracted to the world itself. The world, you could say, the world itself is erotic in some way. Jung says the problem they had at the Bergholzli Clinic was that he and Eugen Bleuler, they noticed that the schizophrenics sort of lost general interest in the world. It wasn't that they lost, but you could say that if you're not attracted, if you're not attached to the world, then you lost your Eros. I mean, it's a profound kind of question. And there's so many of these opposites involved there. You have got logos, which is, there are a number of different kinds of translations of what logos is. One is logic. Another is the kind of ology that's on the end of the word psychology. It's the study of something.
Mm.
That's a kind of
Which is a
logo.
different feel about it.
Yes, and
it's not an antipathy between Eros and Logos when you think of the study of.
yes, and then Jung mentions in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, while he's talking about Eros, he mentions Alfred Adler and Nietzsche. And he says that it suddenly dawned on him that the fuss between Freud and Adler was Freud was for Eros and Adler was for power. And that he got the power idea as an archetype through Nietzsche, which is true. And so he said it became a tussle between Freud and Nietzsche. That was the big fight that Freud had on his hands. But that's not Eros and Logos. That's Eros and power,
Right.
as the opposition.
Mm.
That's another funny thing is that all of these archetypes. I mean, the first question James Hillman ever asked me
Yeah.
at a little party in honor of Paul Kugler's first book, The Alchemy of Discourse, in South Bend, Indiana, around Notre Dame University out there.
Yeah.
There was a little get together of various people. The first question James asked me at a little over hors d'oeuvres and wine was, did I think that all of the archetypes always came in pairs or in opposites?
Right.
And there I was, a young man, and what did I know? But I said, well, I don't know why that should be so. I don't know why that would have to be so. And he didn't take issue with that or anything. He took that under consideration and was mulling it over. Um, there's just people these days are talking about the binaries. You see, one could just have a more differentiated idea. And Eros, when you think about it, there are all of these different names or synonyms. There's Eros, there's sex, love. In the myth, it's amor. I think Eric Neumann's book is Amor and Psyche. That's the translation of the title. Then there's Cupid, is Eros as well. And Cupid is a little often, well, sometimes Cupid or Eros is a young man. And then sometimes he's just a little baby with little wings, and it's on a Valentine's Day card.
Cherubic.
And then there is Saint Valentine's, and we've got that holiday coming up. Then the Christians have got something they call agape, which is Jung talks about that as some kind of morally laden love. That would be like fidelity and all of these kinds of things, or charity, or some other kind of feelings.
Yeah, or I might say an overwhelming spiritual experience of love, which maybe Freud wasn't totally enamored by that idea, but this idea of something oceanic, not necessarily moral, moral in the sense of how we think of religious people as moral, but an overwhelming experience of love. Mm-hmm. But also I would add the Greeks, some of the other differentiations they make. Himeros, the desire, pothos, the longing or the yearning, and anteros, the answering of love. I mean, they have some different kind of distinctions.
Well, in the Freudian world, you have libido.
Yeah.
Or sexual libido. And then you have drive, instinct, and drive. Drive gives you that idea that there's some kind of compelling force to the thing that you can't really just say no to it. That it has some kind of power over you. I mean, it's like AA. It's like any kind of addiction. I mean, you don't want to. If you think the ego is all powerful, there are higher powers. Eros is one of the higher powers, and if you don't recognize that, then it will possess you, and then you will lose your head and lose your life and lose your wife and lose everything, because you will have fallen for something. The id, that's another synonym. Desire would be the one that I myself find most useful. I believe that the difference between Freud and Jung is that Jung has got I believe that psychoanalysis, as I put it, is about only two things: identity and desire. It's about becoming conscious of who you are and what you want. And then it's a question of whether you have the gumption or the chutzpah or the courage or something like that to see whether you can implement your desire in the world, your identity and your desire. To me, this is individuation, really living in the world. And Freud has got some kind of other thing going on where he's dealing with repression and then sublimation. He thinks the way out of the dilemma is to paint or do something like that, is to distract yourself from you don't exercise it so much as that you find a hobby that keeps you from being in the grip of this demon.
I'm not qualified to speak about Freud, but I feel that one thing that maybe Hillman brings, especially in the myth of analysis, is this thing of the creative instinct as Eros, and that rather than perhaps a hobby in order to sublimate your desires, in fact, that this is an essential nature of Eros, that there's this mysterious creative force. And if you think about it, because earlier you were talking about the tortures of love, or the impossibilities of love, and the problems of sex, and all of that as the grist of, psychology. But there's also these mysterious driving forces. Like you wake up one day, maybe in your case, and you say, I have to paint something today. I have to, it's there, I'm ready, or I have to write something, or there's these movements of libido. And I wouldn't call it sublimation. I would call it just being aware of those movements. And again, just like sex or love, they're bigger than ourselves, but they come and go like the libido, and life is about learning how to live with that coming and going.
Well, I have no idea why one person is possessed by this demon or that demon. I just know that there's a whole array of archetypes out there that could exert their force on us at any particular time. And Eros is obviously one of the biggest ones. The very first book, as you know, that I read about psychoanalysis, and that what aroused me sort of erotically about psychoanalysis was a book that the very first word in the title of the very first book I read about psychoanalysis was Eros. It was Herbert Marcuse's Eros and Civilization.
Yeah.
And so there is that word there from the very beginning of my involvement in this whole thing. I think of, I was saying to you that those three paintings or painting collages on the back of the wall back there are they're my homage to Marcel Duchamp. He was a trans person in a way. He invented an alter ego for himself. Rose, c'est la vie. It was just Rose in the first place. Rose was the first name. He said he picked that because it was in France, it was the corniest first name for a girl in the 20th century, to call a girl Rose. Yeah. So he picked that just for fun. And then C'est la vie, spelled Selavy, was the last name that he picked. Of course, the pun is, and then he made Rose, he decided to put a double R in the front. So it's RROSE. So you have a kind of rolling R, like you're Irish or something. It's Rose, Eros, c'est la vie. Eros, okay. That's life. And so could you sum up Freud any better than that? I mean, you're saying that the essence of life, or as Freud said, Eros is the life instinct versus the death instinct. So it's
It's
not
just
just
that
that.
Duchamp was a little bit lighter in his approach towards Eros, we could say.
Well, I think Marcel's main erotic activity was making jokes or making puns and having a sense of humor. And not all psychoanalysts, and I would include Freud in this, seem to have a
Sense
lot
of
of sense
humor.
of humor about some of these things. They get very, very, very serious about sex and other kinds of things like that. They can't laugh about this. Now, it's sex is not just a laughing matter, but that's one of the dimensions of it, is that it's fun and it's funny. I mean, there are lots of jokes that are wonderful sex jokes. I mean, some of them are ridiculous. I remember one of the first jokes I became aware of when I was a kid was a little moron joke. I mean, that would be inappropriate these days too, right? It's like, why did the little moron swim on his back? It's because he didn't want the fish to get his worm. You see,
Oh,
and if you're like prepubescent boy in Texas, you just can't stop laughing at that. You think that's the funniest thing you ever heard.
right.
That they would call it your worm in the first place. And, like this is like you're worried about, this is Freud with his castration anxiety, right? It's like you better watch when you go down to the swimming hole, you
Right.
better be very careful because the monster of the deep may come up and castrate you. See, I mean, it's mythical on that level. I
Yeah.
mean, it's an archetypal mythical joke for a
For a
a
young boy.
brat of a kid.
Yeah.
Okay, and you have to laugh about it, and there are these
I'm just
great
writing
things.
down your name because I've got a feeling you're probably going to get cancelled within the next 2 weeks. Um, what was your surname? Vannoy Adams. Okay, good. We'll
That's
send that
right.
off to the New York
Put it
Post.
out there. Put it out there. But well,
But nevertheless, it is a serious point.
I'm
Funnily
saying
enough.
that there is something I have to say. I don't know whether it would be in defense of Freud or in defense of Marcel Duchamp or not quite Jungian, because
Mm.
the Jungian thing can also get a little bit ascetic sometimes. It really loses a kind of uh, titillation and temptation and teasing and what I would call the erotic.
Yeah.
The word eros doesn't seem to have quite the same feeling as the adjective erotic does to me.
Yeah.
Erotic has got a kind of feeling to it that I find, even in my decrepit old age, intriguing and kind of
Michael,
alluring.
I'm just, this is maybe a little bit off to the side, but I feel that some of the people that are doing the best things around at the moment speak in that erotic kind of language about the world. Like, for example, on this side, you've got climate change as a great moral issue, and we've got to stop burning so much fossil, and that kind of language, if you want to put it that way. And then you have a Bayo, a Komalafe, or whatever, who talks about the entanglements with the world and he speaks in an erotic language in terms of our relationship with the world. And it seems to me that really some of the best people are bringing the erotic back into the language because after all, if there's the love for the world, then the behavior will probably change as well.
Well, that's a whole other conversation because now you're talking about whether you have any kind of erotic relation to nature. And all I would say about that is I'm um, personally sort of, I don't know, baffled and disturbed and perplexed and nonplussed by what I think it's not just the digital remoteness, it's the fact that in my lifetime, for sure, people have become much, much more removed from direct contact with nature. And
Yeah.
so growing up on the farm in Texas and milking cows, I mean, it was hands on. I mean, there was
Yeah.
one moment when I thought, well, later in my life, I thought, well, I guess I was committing an act of bestiality when I was hand milking the cow.
mm,
down at the barn with my dad. I was touching another animal's private parts. I mean,
mm,
you can get into some kind of very weird
yeah,
thing there, but people did. They brought their animals into the house in the wintertime. They named. Joseph Campbell talks about people giving their names to their cows. My grandfather named Henry gave me at my birth a calf that was named Henrietta after
mm.
him, and my first name was Henry. I'm Henry
Mm.
Michael Vannoy Adams, actually. And
Oh, I'm
so
sorry.
I
I'm
had
sorry
this,
about the introduction in
yeah.
retrospect.
Well, I'm just saying I had kind of a family there
Yeah,
with the animals around me, and you see them dying and living and giving birth, and you have a whole other. Now, if that's not some kind of erotic or life and
yeah,
death relationship to reality, it's a very different thing than people are getting everything delivered these days.
yeah. I know
They're
what
not
you
they're
mean.
they're not even shopping at the supermarket anymore, much
It's
less
kind of,
going out.
it's not only the use of erotic in the language that I was talking about, but there's the earthiness of the connection. When people are born on the land and work with animals, and it
Well, the
brings an
powerful
earthiness.
feeling of seeing I mean, I've the veterinarian putting his whole arm up to his elbow in
Yeah,
the uterus of the cow to pull out a calf because the calf is stuck there. I mean, if you haven't
yeah,
been down to the barn and seen something like that, very dramatic, it's a
yeah,
life or death situation. You better
yeah,
have somebody, some brave man there who knows what he's doing and is
yeah.
willing to do something that other people, I don't know, would certainly shy away from. But
And
that's like,
there's something about cities where we've just veered away, living on the 10th level in New York, we've veered away from that kind of connection to the earth. Or, I mean, I know that's simplifying, but it's
well,
kind
I'm
of like
just
we've
saying,
gone a long way
like,
away from it.
well, you have all sorts of powerful feelings if you're living right up
Yeah.
close to reality.
Mm,
And you probably pray and you do all sorts of other things because all sorts of strange things are happening in your immediate vicinity.
mm,
It's not remote at all.
mm,
I mean, I don't know, what to say about this. I mean, it's the Eros is profound, but there's also just this funny thing about anecdotally. I'll tell you a couple of little things. Like 1953 is when Hugh Hefner, who is if there's Freud and Marcel Duchamp, and then there's Hugh Hefner. They're all three people in the 20th century who somehow make a big deal out of Eros or love or sex or whatever you want to call it.
mm,
And in 1953, you see, I'm how old at that time? I'm 6 years old, I believe. I was born in 1947. So in 1953 is the first issue of Playboy magazine in October. And on the cover is Marilyn Monroe, of course. Now,
mm,
Marilyn Monroe is, of course, a huge figure for Eros in
mm.
the 20th century as well. Is there anyone who's bigger than that? I can't think of anyone. I mean, if
No.
you had to, she would be at the top, wouldn't she?
As the image, well, we could
Yes.
say the image of Venus, but somehow, Eros,
Well,
Venus.
think of her tragic life and how tortured she was by
Mm,
she was a sex goddess or a love goddess. I mean, there she
yeah.
was the erotic figure. I mean,
Mm,
she was in the grip of a daimon herself,
yeah.
and all of a miracle.
An overwhelming diamond.
Yes, yes, yes. It killed her in the end, or
Yeah.
the people who were doing various things with her at the end.
Yeah.
Some people who were politicians, if I may say so.
Mm,
And psychoanalysts as well.
mm,
She was involved with all of these people, and she
mm,
died
mm,
out of all of that.
mm.
It's a terrible, terrible thing that befell
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
And But Hugh Hefner in 1953, he gets this magazine out, and then he's got, he's advising people on sexuality in America and in the world and all of these. It's a profound impact. Whatever you
Mm,
think about the Playboy Mansion and the Playboy clubs and the bunny tails and all of that sort of stuff, it
yeah.
it it changed the atmosphere about erotic things in the
Mm,
world profoundly.
yeah.
And so in in 1953, that's happening. And my parents hardly ever went to the movies, but occasionally they did. And in 1953, it may have been the first movie in a movie theater I ever saw. The movie theater in my little tiny Texas hometown was the American Theater. How archetypal is that? We went down to the American Theater, and sitting there in the dark, I was between my mother and my father, and we were watching what? Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, which is
Right.
starring Jane Russell, who gets paid $200,000 for the movie, and Marilyn Monroe, who is not a big star at that time and doesn't get very much money. Okay, but Marilyn sings Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. And she comes on and sings that number in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. And in the middle of it, my dad leans over in the dark and whispers in my ear, ooh wee. So like a initiatory ritual between the father and son. And then my mother, with a big grin on her face, looking at me and my father, pretends to scold him. You see, it's all a fix. I mean, they're in cahoots on this thing. They're kind of playing and initiating their son into, erotic appreciation.
And you've
Uh,
forgotten one person from the US, you know that.
what is that?
Elvis. Elvis, who was a special ambassador or envoy from Eros to get people to start to move their hips. You know,
Well,
he was as big
yeah,
as you.
I hadn't planned to do this, but the second movie, the only other movie that I remember going to the American Theater with my mother and father was for Love Me Tender in
Mm,
1956. That would have been 3 years later. We went
mm,
there and we watched Love Me Tender, and Elvis singing that song, Love Me Tender. It was the first time I ever saw Elvis and all that. And my father told me later at the McKnight's drugstore across the street where we were having a Coke and a booth, he said that this was, I think, the Lorelei. So, I mean, he sang himself this folk tune, Irish or something, that was the music for the lyrics of Love Me Tender. But but of course, Elvis the pelvis and all of that sort of thing, that was Marilyn was a big erotic thing, and then Elvis was the other 1950s huge erotic performer. Uh,
mm,
and um, and so, those are tremendous things. And then in 1958, you see, I'm living with my parents. We're not on the farm yet. My grandmother hasn't had her stroke, and my grandfather has not got his prostate cancer. Like we don't move to the farm until we're taking care of my grandpa. But we're out north of town, way in the other direction, and we're on the highway. Across the street is Clayton's grocery store. It's Highway 78 from Texas up into Oklahoma. 10 miles away is the Red River and Oklahoma border. But so now there I am. I'm 11 years old in 1958. And there with great trepidation in my soul, I walk across the highway, I cross the street and go to Clayton's grocery store. And I walk up to Mr. Clayton behind the counter and I put my 50 cents down. It was 50 cents in 1958, I believe. You put that down on the counter and you say, I'd like your 11-year-old boy, you look up at Mr. Clayton and say, I'd like a Playboy magazine. You see? And then he doesn't blink an eye. You think, is he going to tell my mother and father about this? Is he going to, tell them about this? He reaches under the counter. They're not on the newsstand there. They're under the counter. He reaches
hidden.
under the counter.
Eros hidden under the counter.
Hunter hidden under the counter. It should be hidden under the counter. And it's in a plain brown bag. He puts it in. And then
Mm,
I carry that plain brown bag back across the street and over to the house.
mm.
And the rest is history. But I'm just saying, can you imagine the kind of anxiety that an 11-year-old prepubescent boy has in like he wants to look at what the erotic looks like, right? I mean, he wants to get a glimpse of it. And then suddenly Hugh Hefner is making this possible in the
Mm.
20th century. I mean, it's a
I,
very
I,
big.
so it makes me think a little bit about. Well, there's two questions I'd like to ask. I hope they're related to what you're talking
Yeah.
about. But did Duchamp have? Could I put it this way? Did he have some serious things to say? It's just that I'm not aware of his work, right? I mean, did he, apart from just joking about Eros, was he was he saying things which were deep and fundamental in any way? And then secondly, it just, moving to the other side, when you talk about the realities of this history, it makes me think about the present time, because we seem to be very a little bit anti-Eros in its expression, if I could put it that way, in terms of how we like to.
Well, look, I really, you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, and I don't know why this popped into my mind, but Charlie Chaplin and Fatty Arbuckle. Fatty Arbuckle is accused of doing something with a Coca-Cola bottle, and he's drummed out of Hollywood. I mean, it's a scandal. The scandals that are around all the time now in social media and things like that. Maybe it's more evident, but in the yellow press around Hearst newspapers and things like that in the early
So
20th century.
we've always had it. Is that what you're trying to say? We've always had
partly,
this.
and then Charlie Chaplin's wife took him to the cleaners because he wanted her to perform fellatio, and he didn't think that this was some great sin. You see, but she made a big scandal about it in the press and all this sort of thing, and almost had Charlie Chaplin kicked out of the country
Right.
when he was just being the little tramp in those wonderful, wonderful movies. Now, he married Una O'Neill finally and was a very, very happy man. And so Charlie certainly survived and thrived. I mean, and then the anti-communist people came after Charlie Chaplin. So there's always somebody out there who I guess can complain about you or arrest you or try to lock you up and prevent you from expressing yourself. And so I don't know. Uh, See, I'm very suspicious of people who believe that the world is coming to an end and this is the worst of all times. When I was in high school, everybody in America had to read Dickens and A Tale of Two Cities, and the thing opens with "It's the best of times and it was the worst of times." And so when James writes a book about we've had 100 years of psychotherapy and the world is getting worse, I have to kind of laugh and raise my eyebrows and say, "Come on, James, there's another thing going on here as well." And then James is also then points out that all of these people, like the Saint Michael and Saint George myth about the end of the world and slaying the dragon and all this, is kind of like the favorite myth. I mean, he mentions in that book that Ronald Reagan's the only book Ronald Reagan read while he was the president was the late great Planet Earth. I mean, we don't need Greta Thunberg in this particular generation to be talking about the end of things. We had
So,
nuclear
so
winter.
what are you saying? There's always been taboos around Eros, and people have always responded to it in various ways. And repression has probably always been one of the major ways that people have responded to Eros as well. Is that what you're
Or
saying?
it's like Freud says, it's not just Eros versus power or Eros versus logos. It's also, as Freud said, Eros versus death, or as some people say, Thanatos. Thanatos is not a word that he used,
Mm,
but the life instincts versus the death instincts.
mm,
And that's, I mean, you can dichotomize it in that way. If you like binaries, then
mm,
it's like if you want to uh, be sexual, or if you want to be spontaneous, or if you want to be exciting, or if you want to do something a little risky or something risque. If you want to do any of those things, then somebody is going to try to eliminate you. They're going to say, "Don't do that," or "You're a bad boy," or "We're going to pass a law that says you can't do that unnatural act." I mean, these forces are out there of repression. Repression is just another word for death in some way. I mean, they
mm.
want to eliminate or annihilate. I mean, it's an incredibly, if you think about it, it's astounding, isn't it? Is
Yeah, it
it they
is.
want they want to kill love. in a
mm,
way. They want to kill what makes the world go around. Now,
mm,
the thing that makes the world go around is very dicey because,
mm.
you know, I mean, I tell you, in the fifth grade, I was watching, you know, David Lynch just died, and I've been
Yeah,
thinking about Twin Peaks and all this.
yeah,
And there's this guy, Russ Tamblyn, who was in West Side Story as a young man, but he becomes Dr. Jacoby in Fire Walk with Me.
mm,
And he's got one red lens and one blue lens, like he's at a 3D theater. He's a very funny shrink. He's the psychoanalyst in Twin Peaks. And I saw a meme online of him, and he's lying back on the psychoanalytic couch, and he has dangling from his hand is a little necklace, and it's a half heart necklace. Now, you know, when you were in Texas and I was a kid in the 1950s, you would go in the autumn to Dallas for the Texas State Fair. All of the rural kids would go to the state fair. They'd go to the Midway. They would play the games. They would buy crazy food. And the girls would buy pins that say "Born to Raise Hell." You know, they were like, if they went to the big city, they born to raise hell, and they'd wear that for the day, and then they wouldn't wear it back in their little hometown. But you know, that whole kind of like erotic scene was going on there, and uh, you would go down there, and one of the things you could buy on the Midway was a half heart necklace. There were two little parts that were separated with a kind of broken or jagged thing there. One said, "My heart, I give, my heart I give," and the other half said, "To you, my love."
right.
Now there I was around, I don't know, in the sixth grade, and so I loved this little girl. I won't mention her name. I don't want to burden her. Okay, with
And
I
you gave her
that,
one of those hearts.
you know, that I'm the one who got away. But I bought this. I was like,
So
again,
after all this, the great analyst from New York, and it turns out you're just a romantic, big time,
yeah.
Michael.
Well, I'm talking romance is another word for eros. You see, it's romanticism, sentimentalism, nostalgia. The little girl that you first fell in love with, all of these kinds of things. The girl who broke your heart. I bought this little thing, this little necklace, and I went back and I screwed up my courage. And when I got back to school on Monday, I walked up to her and I said, "Will you take this half heart from me and be my girlfriend?" And so she took it and all that. And then the next day, she came up to me and told me that she couldn't accept my half heart because she was in love with so and so, who was a year older. Well, I mean, what can you do about the boy who's a year older? There's no way you can compete, right? I mean, it was all lost. But it was a moment of tremendous sorrow and anguish and humor. I mean, it's the little boy who's putting his heart out there and
Mm,
being rejected. I
yeah,
mean, that's another thing about Eros, I think, is the vulnerability. If
yeah.
you're going to present yourself to the world, you might
Hence,
get turned down.
hence in myth, Eros shown as the child. I think that the tremendous vulnerability of that situation and situations to do with Eros, the childlike vulnerability.
Now, one more little story, okay?
Yeah.
In Texas, when you're in the 1950s, one of the things that the parents do
Mm,
to kind of initiate the kids
mm,
to this teenage world that's coming fast is
yeah.
they arrange a hayride. You can't, like, there's adults around, it's chaperoned. They're sitting in the hay too, so you can't get up to too much trouble, but you're there in the dark, you know, with a girl. And so I went on this hayride. It's the one and only hayride I've ever been on. All right. And I was on with this little girl. She was the cutest little girl, prettiest little girl. I was just thrilled to be on the hayride with her. And I came home and I enter the kitchen, and my mother and my aunt are waiting there, like I mean, they're hovering to try to get the lowdown on what the boy's experience was. Like women, I'm sorry, I'm being a misogynist again, but women cannot resist. It's like they're going to have to get the lowdown on this. And so they said, "How was the hayride?" And I said, "Well, it wasn't very good." And I said, "Well, who did you go with?" And I mentioned this little girl's name, and they said, my aunt or somebody said, well, she's a nice girl. And I said, well, sometimes you don't want to be with a nice girl. And then my mother and my mother and my aunt just almost collapsed on the floor, roaring with laughter. They knew exactly what I was talking about, of course, but that's this is Rose
Do
la
you think
vie.
that's why ultimately you went into psychology and became a, no, if I could ask that,
Well, I don't
because of
think
that
so.
exact experience?
Um, well, it's a combination, and probably I told you, like at age 21 in 1968, the year of the revolution, the year of let's make love and not war, the whole hippie thing in 1968. That's when I read Marcuse's Eros and Civilization, and he was talking about an end to repression. And as a 21 year
He was
old,
very Freudian, wasn't he?
as a 21-year-old, somewhat pretentiously virile young man, that appealed to me. I mean, I
Yeah.
didn't have any experience at that time, really and
Mm.
truly.
Yeah.
I was pretty inexperienced erotically,
Mm.
but I was, intrigued by it. I was fascinated by it. I mean, it was like something on the horizon for me. And in 1968, the whole country or my generation seem to be on the same page
Uh,
with that.
Taken up with that topic, if we could put it like that. Michael, I wonder whether, okay, so we know how Freud treated the whole, with great seriousness, because I'm aware that we're, perhaps getting towards, but it's kind of like he approached with great seriousness this whole topic of Eros, repression, libido, etc. Tell us a little bit, could you, I'm asking, please, tell us a little bit about the differentiation with Jung. And I'm not sure whether you answered the question with Duchamp and Hillman. So just tell us a little bit about their approach towards Eros, and perhaps the flavor they brought to it.
I guess
What did Jung?
the one that seems to me easiest to talk about in some sense and briefly would be
Yeah,
Duchamp because Freud, Jung, and Hillman just do not have the sense of humor that Duchamp has about it.
yeah,
And I have to say that archetype of humor
yeah,
or a laugh about it, the ability to laugh at yourself erotically
yeah,
and not take yourself so seriously. I mean, see, that is a kind of antidote to possession. I mean, you can exorcise yourself if you can laugh at yourself. The way I mean, I'm
yeah,
exorcising my own anguish about Eros by telling you these funny little anecdotes from my childhood about how scared I was, how frustrated I was, how in puppy love I was. I mean, that's what they used to call it. You were like a little
yeah,
dog, I guess. You know. With your tongue out with these little girls. I mean, they didn't know what they were doing, and you didn't know what you were doing, but there was something that was in the air, and
yeah,
you couldn't define. Again, it's an indefinable kind of thing, but it
yeah,
is happening to you. You can call it hormones, or you can come up with some other kind of thing, but to call it a divinity or a god, that seems
yeah,
to me just as reasonable as to say it's a chemical
yeah,
thing. I'm not against calling it a chemical, but I think that's part of the full picture, and
mm,
it's something that we've added to it. We didn't understand the chemistry of love. Um, we could, I mean, the whole alchemy thing there. They talk about, the male and the female, and the king and the queen, and the conjunction, and all of these kinds of things. They think it's a coupling. You
yeah,
bring the opposites together, and then there's a transformation.
yeah,
You talk about in the analytic office, people talk metaphorically about whether you have chemistry with somebody, and that seems to me a kind of modern alchemical way of talking about
well,
eros.
I think even maybe it was Jung who said it's like uh, mixing two chemical substances together, and it depends. The third substance is created when two people kind of mix their substances together. That's always kind of held a bit of a
If you look at Freud's
idea for me.
specimen dream and in the interpretation of dreams,
Yeah,
he is interpreting this dream, and he's looking for, I mean, this is almost an alchemical, I mean, seriously,
Yeah,
literally an alchemical quest of Freud's to
yeah,
try to come up with, I mean, he did a whole lot of cocaine, 4 or 5 grams per night and all that. There's even a book by a British psychiatrist, a woman, who suggested that Freud's sexual theory was a product of the fact that he was doing 4 or 5 grams of cocaine per night. Why wouldn't he think everything is about sex if he was, doing that much coke? But I'm just saying he's reading the first dream that he says he subjected to a systematic interpretation, and he's talking about this formula, a chemical formula that comes to him, and that this is the secret formula for sexual chemistry between people. Like it's if you knew that, it's like if you knew abracadabra, if you knew just what the magic word is, if you could
mm,
just say the open sesame or whatever it is, if you had that key, then you would know everything there is to know. This is the guy who says he wants a plaque on the wall of the house where he had the dream. In this house, Sigmund Freud discovered the secret of dreams. I mean, he's very, very monomaniacal about, he's into oneness. And so sex or this is like, he can't see Jung and those people say it's indefinable or it's a whole bunch of stuff. It's like maybe it's the archetype that's got so many synonyms floating around there, and none of the words is exactly accurate. Uh, you've got infatuation and affection and lust. I mean, it's not the pleasure principle. It's actually in German the Lust principle. It's the lust. I mean, in German, lust is more like the old flavor of the English, where you got a lusty lass at the bar. It's not simply a sex thing. It's a life thing. She's lusty. You
right,
have this kind of life force there, and so the
mm,
lust principle is like that. But it doesn't translate just as pleasure.
mm,
See, now you get into the original Golden Ass, and you get into the Eros and Psyche myth,
mm,
which we haven't even talked about.
yeah,
Which is there behind us. One of the figures there, the woman in the figure, her name Psyche becomes the name for an entire science or discipline or profession.
yeah,
Psychology, the study of psyche. I mean, what a bigger God could there be than that? To be
mm,
giving your whole name to the entire thing we're involved in, the
yeah,
analysis of psyche.
yeah,
Where we're like our entire future is about analyzing the psyche continually,
yeah,
and in conjunction with Eros. And so, like, here's Freud. The whole program is kind of laid out in advance. You bring Eros and psyche together, which is what Freud did, and then what do you get out of that? As James said, reminds us, the birth of pleasure. Their child is pleasure. You get
voluptus,
the pleasure principle out of it.
yeah,
The conjunction of these things, they're not opposites anymore. You bring them together, Eros and Psyche, and
mm.
then it gives birth to pleasure. It brings pleasure into the world. And
Which is a
then you're sort of there with Marcel Duchamp, who's saying, well, the best pleasure is a good laugh. I mean, in the face of everything, all of the enormities of the world, if you can't kind of laugh about all of these things, the human condition, that itself is erotic in some
yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah.
So,
That's good. I think that's a good place to end. But that's good, Michael. And I like that whole thing about the laughing. Um, I think that's that. I don't know. In my language, that's that little bit of the attitude, the tricksterish nature of it. Maybe he was a bit of a trickster too, but it's the kind of great leveler. The great. It kind of destroys the paranoia and the over. I don't quite know how to put it, but there's something so healthy about it.
well, it's Shakespeare again with his clowns and his gravediggers
Yeah,
and comic relief. I mean,
Yeah.
from the tragedy of life and all that sort of thing, you've got to have some buffoons around or the groundlings or somebody lower
Yeah.
class
Yeah.
who, I mean, the
Right.
populace
The
or
ribald.
yeah, it's somebody who is telling a risque joke
Yeah.
over on the side for whoever wants to hear, because they're the other people who are reprimanding people and wagging their finger at people and saying
You
we're
can't
not
say
going
this.
we're censoring
In fact,
we're
I read recently, I heard recently that in the UK, and the UK is worse than the US in some respects about all of this, that pub banter, they are beginning to police pub banter. So can you imagine what would go on there? Like it would be impossible.
Well,
I mean, you'd have a,
I actually, to remind you, because you're losing your memory, I sent you a little article about that. I said,
oh, maybe,
what they're trying to pass. One of the things that they're trying to pass, or somebody has, I don't know, is there's not just what the bartender might say to you that you might, I don't know, say he's got a hostile pub, but it's like they're talking about monitoring what the patrons say at their
yeah,
table
yeah,
and going
incredible.
over and telling them they had better, watch their words.
That,
And I don't know, maybe they
that's
should
a
think
bit
about
crazy.
not serving alcohol or doing something. I mean, it's the Dionysus would be another place to go with that, because
Yeah,
he's one of the figures that circulates around with this. And
yeah.
the pub
The
is someplace.
Dionysus the Loosener, and he actually probably spends a lot of time hanging out in pubs,
Well,
if you want to
the
put it that way.
grape, you got grape or the barley or the hops or you got some kind of thing
Yeah,
that is going to become well, alchemically it's going to be fermented, right? The fermentation process, fermentatio,
yeah.
and then it alters your state of consciousness, and you are susceptible. You go into
You're
the bar
loosened.
anyway to lower your inhibitions, to alter your state of consciousness. This is where you might get brave enough to uh, give somebody a line at the bar, right? I mean, you might turn to the person by you
Yeah,
and I don't know, say something. You might get
yeah.
slapped. I don't know. You might get
The
uh,
sensor is lubricated into a kind of a sleep, and then
well,
but
well, there.
maybe it's necessary, and maybe that's why in olden times they always had that kind of well, like they have the thing in Brazil, those events where for 2 days everything was lowered and people wore a mask and could be whatever they wanted
Oh,
to be, and it was allowed out kind of thing. So
well, it's like Fastnacht in Switzerland,
yes,
or
fast
Halloween
night.
here,
Yeah,
or Carnival in Brazil or someplace,
yeah, carnival.
or Mardi Gras in New Orleans. It's
Yeah,
occasionally you get to go out there. I mean, probably in disguise, because
mm,
you could be outed, I guess. I mean, there must be a
mm,
reason why you're covering your face while you allow yourself to do these antics.
yeah,
But again, it's like clown behavior, or it's
yeah,
breaking the rules. It is tricksterish. So the trickster has something to do with Eros as well.
yeah.
Uh, Rule breaking is inherent in some way to Eros.
And,
Uh,
and
it's
uh, the
it's
word we
not being
haven't mentioned is taboo. Is because if you think about a Robin Williams or a Billy Connolly, as they head straight towards that taboo that's held within the
well.
culture,
There
don't they?
you are back with your Ten Commandments. You see, those kinds of things are
Mm,
meant to keep people from having fun.
yeah,
Or from doing something spontaneous. I mean, they're there for a reason, because you might regret what
yeah,
you've done.
yeah,
You might regret coveting your neighbor's wife or whatever it is.
yeah.
But I mean, there was an
Because
old
people do go through the impossibilities of love, and maybe to end on a serious note is thank God for the impossibilities of Eros, because psychologists would be out of a job if there hadn't have been these tortures, these impossibilities, these uh, unanswerable questions of Eros. and it's created a whole livelihood. So we can celebrate that.
Okay, that sounds good.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you, John. Bye-bye.